When the winds of change blow, some build walls and others build windmills. Building walls shows a passive and defensive attitude, while building windmills reflect an active and creative response. They bring uncertainty, but at the same time, opportunity too. In these turbulent times for world order, we believe South Korea should focus on building windmills. The second Trump administration could be a turning point. The winds of change are coming. That's why Seoul National University's Institute for Future Strategy, IFS, has prepared for this policy report of the past 6 months. IFS aims to produce high-quality research and policy recommendations from independent and nonpartisan stances with a commitment to the public interest. The IFS established a task force to draft a policy report on U.S.-China relations, bringing together knowledge from scholars and practitioners. This report recommends policy toward China to the administration of both United States and South Korea. And the first takeaway point of the report is United States and its allies need to prepare a long-term, sustainable China strategy. Trump administration may impose punitive tariffs on China and push for increased military burden sharing with the U.S. allies. These measures may be useful in short term, but they are not sustainable in long-term U.S.-China competition to make America great again. Coordinated and comprehensive China strategy, working closely with U.S. allies, especially South Korea, will be crucial. South Korea's combat-tested experience, advanced weapon systems, and robust supply chains can play a key role in achieving these goals and maintaining world order. Another key message of the report is Korea's new national identity and vision. Building on this new identity, Republic of Korea can and should contribute to stable management of world order. South Korea is no longer a middle power country on the fringe of East Asia. Over the past 20 years, Korea has experienced rapid growth in both its national power and global standing, and is now working to define a new identity and goals that align with this elevated status. And newly emerging major power with significant economic, military, soft power, South Korea now holds both the capabilities and responsibility to shape the development and outcomes of this global rivalry. Instead of just watching how U.S. make decisions and trying to fit into their framework, whether it's a triangle or square, we Koreans want to take part in and shaping the discussion and making the framework together with the Americans. For example, if President Trump comes in with a new science technology policy, we want to work with the US right from the start to help design those policies and rules together. This way, it's not just good for South Korea, it benefits America too. America first is not America alone. America needs South Korea and other allies. If the US wants to address China's challenge effectively, America can't do it alone. South Korea is a valuable partner. We think Trump must have a grand vision that propelled him to the US presidency, even if it's accompanied by uncertainty. His focus must not be on short-term profits. He's looking at larger and strategic gains. South Korea can discuss broader long-term framework with the US, especially under the leaders like Trump, who value such grand-scale collaborations or big deals. Core resilience is the key concept of the strategic framework that our report highlights. When there is external shock, it's natural to feel the impact and get hurt temporarily. The key question is, does the shock knock you down and end in the game? Or do you stagger for a moment and recover and return to fight? Core resilience is the collective ability to quickly bounce back and fight again after such a shock. South Korea and US must work together. By doing so, both nations become more resilient to the external shocks. United States, Korea, and other like-minded countries can work together to constrain the exercise of coercive power by potential aggressors. The resilient supply chains, resilient high-tech clusters, resilient military alliance networks, and sea lines of communication linked to Korea and the United States must be strengthened. That being said, what is current state of China? We think China has been both externally assertive and internally anxious. The two elements may reinforce each other. While China appears assertive externally, this assertiveness reflects not only Beijing's reaction to external pressure posed by US, but also significant internal contradictions and vulnerabilities. Chinese ruling elite's anxiety comes from many factors that include economic vulnerabilities, fear of social unrest, and concerns over the sustainability of Chinese Communist Party's one-party rule. Externally assertive, internally anxious China. This duality is significant when it comes to understanding China's current and future action on the global stage. Combination of China's growing military capability and unpredictable internal dynamics poses risk not only to Korea's security, but also to broader stability of Indo-Pacific region. What about South Korea's perspective and stance on world order? South Korea is supporting US-led international system. United States, South Korea should preserve the organizing principles of rules-based world order, opposing any attempts to change it through coercive power. To that end, Korea will strengthen cooperation with the United States, its allies, to deter Chinese aggression while continuing to engage Beijing diplomatically and economically based upon global norms and rules. Seoul will work with Washington to pursue a coordinated and consistent policy toward China. Let me stop here and I hand floor over to my colleague, Professor Chun Jae-sung, who will discuss specific policy recommendation to help realize the vision and strategy I've just outlined. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, at the outset of the report, we had several considerations which shaped our approach. So let me talk about that, and I will summarize the contents of the report. You can download the report from the website of IFSSNU. First, our recommendations are designed to be practical and actionable, emphasizing policies that can be implemented in real-world settings. To achieve this, we identified areas where US-ROK strategic cooperation is most critical and feasible. While there are discussions on broader issues, such as human rights or non-traditional concerns like climate change, we focused on the most promising areas that provide direct and mutual benefits to both countries. Second, we recognize that the China factor, as Inju said, is the most significant variable in US-ROK relations, given the intensifying the US-China rivalry. Historically, the alliance has concentrated heavily on North Korea, often sidelining China-related considerations. Furthermore, South Korea's policy toward China is inherently complex, balancing economic interdependence and security concerns. However, during the Biden administration, key points about the China challenge became clearer, allowing us better integrate the China factor into alliance cooperation strategies. Third, acknowledging the uncertainty over who will lead the next US administration, we prioritized economic cooperation at the forefront of the report. This represents a shift from traditional framework that have emphasized military security and North Korea-related issues. By framing the North Korean nuclear problem within the broader context of which we call the Indo-Pacific nuclear order, we sought to elevate the issue beyond a peninsula-specific challenge, reflecting its regional and global implications. Lastly, we sought to expand the scope of cooperation from a strictly bilateral framework to include multilateral and minilateral approaches. While a potential second Trump administration might favor bilateral and transactional policies, this report reflects a forward-looking and optimistic vision for the alliance. By broadening the framework of cooperation, we hope to safeguard the alliance's adaptability and resilience, even in the face of potential policy shifts under the next, Trump administration. Let me highlight then the findings of our report and present actionable recommendations to further fortify U.S.-ROK cooperation. In this era of intensifying U.S.-China rivalry, the alliance remains a cornerstone of stability and prosperity. First part is economic security and resilience. Let me begin with the economic dimension, which forms the foundation of our mutual resilience. The U.S. and South Korea have demonstrated remarkable synergy in responding to disruptions in global supply chains and the rapid pace of technological competition. For example, partnerships such as the Chip 4 Alliance have enabled us to secure access to critical semiconductor technologies while reducing over-reliance on adversarial actors. Similarly, the U.S.-ROK Shipbuilding Alliance, which actually President Trump mentioned in his talk to our president over the phone, exemplifies how economic cooperation can contribute to broader strategic goals. South Korea's shipbuilding expertise, combined with U.S. defense needs, enhances the resilience of our military supply chains and strengthens maritime security. To summarize our findings in this area, first, the South Korea's investments in the U.S. amounting to the over $100 billion in strategic industries like semiconductors, biotechnology, and EVs underscore the deepening economic integration between our nations. Diversification of supply chains, particularly through initiatives like Alta Asia, helps mitigate risks associated with China's dominance in critical materials and manufacturing. Our recommendations urge both nations to establish multilateral research hubs to lead advancements in AI, green technologies, and next-generation batteries. Strengthen strategic resource chains for critical materials like rare earth materials, which are vulnerable to economic coercion. These actions are essential not only for maintaining economic independence, but also for setting global standards in emerging industries. Together, the U.S. and South Korea can shape a future where economic security and innovation go hand in hand. Next part is Indo-Pacific maritime security, which is very important. The dramatic expansion of China's naval capabilities pose a direct challenge to the stability of the region. Over the past 2 decades, Beijing has outpaced Washington in naval ship production, and its assertive actions in the South and East China Seas threatens the rules-based order. South Korea plays a pivotal role in ensuring regional stability by protecting critical sea lines of communication and contributing to multilateral efforts. Seoul has demonstrated its commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. Notable examples include South Korea's participation in U.S.-led frameworks like the Regional Sustainment Framework, which enhances readiness and maintenance capabilities for allied naval forces. There are other recommendations, but key recommendations are expanding South Korea's participation in multilateral maritime security initiatives with partners like Japan, Australia, and ASEAN, enhancing strategic readiness in the Taiwan Strait through institutionalized consultations between the U.S., South Korea, and probably with Japan. These measures will deter attempts to alter the status quo and uphold the principles of freedom of navigation and peaceful resolution of disputes. The third part, the Indo-Pacific nuclear order. The nuclear dimension of our alliance requires renewed focus, particularly given North Korea's advancing nuclear program and its deepening ties with other authoritarian regimes like China and Russia, especially these days, the security pact between North Korea and Russia. Our findings emphasize that deterrence and diplomacy must work in tandem to address these threats. So this report highlights the need to resume denuclearization talks with North Korea while also engaging China and Russia in broader nuclear arms control frameworks. The importance of revising the U.S.-ROK nuclear cooperation agreement to allow South Korea limited uranium enrichment capabilities, reducing its dependence on external sources, especially from Russia. To strengthen deterrence, we recommend enhancing the credibility of U.S. extended deterrence through mechanisms akin to NATO's nuclear sharing model, aligning nuclear policies with a multi-domain integrated deterrence strategy to address threats across traditional and non-traditional domains. These steps will not only reassure allies, but also send a clear signal to the adversaries that US-RK alliance is prepared to meet any challenge. So let me summarize some policy recommendations. As a whole, our policy recommendations are designed to reinforce these efforts and ensure the alliance remains adaptive and forward-looking. So they include economic initiatives, which accelerate joint investments in strategic industries, particularly in technologies like AI and semiconductors, to counter China's growing influence. Second, security cooperation, deepen trilateral coordination with Japan to enhance regional deterrence, especially in the context of maritime and nuclear threats. Indo-Pacific nuclear governance, work together, and not just for nuclear, but to reform international institutions in general, promoting inclusivity and countering attempts to undermine the rules-based order. Okay, let me stop here. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Chae-Sung and Inju, for a summary of the report. And I encourage everyone who's watching to go to the website, download it, and read it. It is quite provocative and as we said at the outset, important food for thought. I think that's the critical role that the report provides in thinking about allies and how they ought to react to changing U.S.-China relations. Those who are watching this event live, you can submit questions to our speakers through the CSIS webpage where you registered for this event, and we will turn to your questions in just a little bit. But I'm first going to turn to three experts on these issues who are going to share their reactions to the report and the way in which it converges with issues in which they focus on a daily basis. Let me introduce to you our three panelists. First is Ellen Kim. She is my colleague and a senior fellow with the Korea chair here at CSIS. Her research focuses on U.S.-Korean relations and U.S.-China strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. She joined the Korea chair upon its inception in 2009 and previously served as its associate director. She holds a PhD in political science and international relations from the University of Southern California, an MPP from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and a BA in international relations and Japanese studies from Wellesley. Also with us is my colleague Bonnie Lin, who is director of the China Power Project and senior advisor here at CSIS. Previously, she was the acting associate director of the strategy and doctrine program of RAND and a political scientist at RAND Corporation, where she analyzed different aspects of China's foreign and defense policy and U.S. competition with China, including China's use of gray zone tactics against U.S. allies and partners. Dr. Lin also served in the Office of the Secretary of Defense from 2015 to 2018, where she was director for Taiwan, country director for China, and senior advisor for China. And then also with us is Steve Zhang, who is professor of China Studies and director of the China Institute at the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, in London. He is also a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences and an emeritus fellow of St. Antony's College at Oxford. He previously served as the head of the School of Contemporary Chinese Studies and as director of the China Policy Institute at the University of Nottingham. Before that, he spent 29 years at Oxford, where he earned his DPhil and worked as a professorial fellow, dean and director of the Asian Studies Center at St. Antony's. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us in this conversation. Let me turn things over first to Ellen, who will respond about the report's finding and share your views about South Korea and how other U.S. allies and partners in East Asia may respond to changing U.S.-China relations. Over to you, Ellen.
Thank you, Scott. And first of all, for inviting me. and the opportunity to read this very important report. This report does cover a wide range of issues that are really critical to the U.S.-Korea relations at this point, with a list of recommendations that will have a really great implication for both U.S. and South Korea. So I strongly recommend the audience to read this report. It is indeed a very thought-provoking report, so I strongly recommend others to read it. I would like to first just echo what Professor John and Professor Son mentioned, that I agree with many of the things that they said on the economic security. The U.S. RK with the incoming Trump administration's policy on America First, I think that it's going to create there's going to be a lot of tensions, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for both U.S. and South Korea to find their new area opportunity to collaborate. So this is going to be, there's going to be a lot of heated tensions, but at the same time, dynamics that will move forward both alliances. Having said that, I have about 4 or 5 comments, mainly targeting on the security and nuclear dimensions of this report. First, I'm not, as a Korean American, as reading this and considering that we are presenting this report to Trump administration that calls for the America First policy, I was thinking from how the U.S. public or the Trump administration people will react to this. So my comments are from that perspective, particularly. So first of all, many of the recommendations on the security and nuclear issues, I think it looks to me that many of them are Korea first. They're not alliance first, or they're not America first, for sure. If we are presenting this to Trump administrations, I think they do not necessarily take into account of the standing U.S. policy. In that sense, I think that the report needs to provide some explanations about why this is America first, or why this is good for America. I think that will give more convincing, or give more weight to this, many of the recommendations for the U.S. official to as they read through this report. My second point is on the U.S.-China relations. 2 thoughts on that. First, the report indicates that the direction of the U.S.-China relations under Trump somehow not clear, remains to be seen. But I think that the direction is pretty clear, that the main focus of Trump's foreign policy is going to be on China and China and China. So we also need to think, and also we also need to think about how North Korea and South Korea stands on the state of U.S.-China relations different. I mean, South Korea likes when China and U.S.-China relations is good, but North Korea likes when U.S.-China relations bad. So because of this dynamic, when we are talking about, bringing South Korea, North Korea, China, and U.S. into the room for discussions, we're going to have a lot of difficulty navigating these conflicting dynamic between the stakeholders. So we need to think about those points. My third point is the idea about the rotating nuclear assets around the peninsula, and also the nuclear sharing recommendations. I think usually in Korea, it was either one or the other. But in this report, I find out that these recommendations are put it together as a one, which makes me think that what would be the justification for this, for the Trump administration to consider that? I think that might be a better way to think about this as we try to talk to the U.S. official about this idea. My fourth point is on the idea about bringing back nuclear weapons back into South Korea. I understand the real concern that many people have in Korea about this, given North Korea's growing nuclear capability and the possible advanced military technology or nuclear technology, other sensitive technology that Russia might be giving to North Korea at this point. But we also need to think about this possibility that bringing nuclear weapons to Korea could give assurance to Korean public, but it may not give a deterrence to potential nuclear attack, preemptive nuclear attack from China or North Korea if they know that nuclear weapons is coming from US to Korea. And also, we need to remember what happened to the different reactions that South Korea people had about the THAAD deployment. If there's a certain location being designated for the nuclear weapons, US nuclear weapons to be deployed, I'm sure that the people living neighborhood will be having a very different view about bringing nuclear weapons back into Korea. So in order to not to have that, that incident, we need to think about the more broader impact about how this is going to affect not just the U.S.-Korea relations, but also how South Korean people react, despite the fact that more than 70% of South Korean people right now on many of the public opinion polls shows that they support the nuclear weapons coming to Korea. My last point is on the economic security. I think I agree with, as I said, I agree with many of the points that are being mentioned in the report. But one thing that I found out is that there's no discussion of the countering China's economic coercion, which South Korea has suffered a lot. And I think that in U.S., in Washington, I think that many of the things that is really important for U.S. is how to address the issue together with the U.S. and our allies and partners who actually experience the Chinese economic coercion. So I think that's something that we should think about this. So I'll stop there.
Well, Ellen, thank you very much for those comments and reactions to the report. Let me now turn to Bonnie Lin for your thoughts, Bonnie, about how you expect China to react to these kinds of proposals, as well as how you think this will affect cross-strait dynamics and anything else that you saw important in the report. Over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Scott, for the invite to comment on this very important report. I echo the comments that Scott, you and Ellen made about how thought-provoking and important this report is. So I very much encourage everyone to read the report in detail. What I would say, I've divided my comments into a couple of sections. So the first is I'll talk about the report's assessment of China and maybe offer a couple comments there. And similar to Ellen, I'll also talk a little bit about what I think might be differences in the Trump administration's approach to China and how that differs from what we see in the report. I'll offer some brief comments on the one or two recommendations, and then I have 3 questions for the report authors. So in terms of the report's assessments on China, so the report notes that China is marked by external assertiveness and internal anxiety. What I would add to that is China's regional and global ambitions, China's much darker view of its overall external environment, and what we're seeing across China, which is the increasing securitization of almost all issues related to China. I was very intrigued by the report's assessment about internal anxieties within China. I think it's definitely true that Xi Jinping has sought to elevate and consolidate control of the CCP, and that there are a range of domestic concerns that China worries about, including what you mentioned in the report, economic slowdown, social unrest, etc. However, I'm not sure, and this is where I slightly disagree with the report, that Chinese leaders your report describes Chinese leaders as choosing Xi Jinping, and it suggests that they wanted him to consolidate power, and his choice was a preemptive response to internal problems that China was facing. I think most analysts in the United States view Xi's ascension as that wasn't necessarily the route that he came to power. But I think it's very intriguing how you characterize that. I very much agree with your assessment that Beijing overall is likely to adopt more harsh and counterproductive responses to both its domestic and international challenges. The other main comment I'll have is on the nuclear side. You rightly characterize China's nuclear ambitions and what China wants to achieve potentially in the future. But I think there's still quite a bit of debate in the United States as to whether China wants to achieve nuclear parity with the United States or not. Regardless of whether that is the case, your report mentions that there's a growing risk that if China achieves nuclear parity, that China will be more assertive in its efforts to alter the status quo. I broadly agree with that, but I would also add that even if China is not able to achieve nuclear parity, so say they stop short of nuclear parity with the United States, we're likely to see more assertive Chinese behavior. And as I mentioned, at least in the United States, we're not completely sure that China believes it needs to achieve complete nuclear parity with the United States. In terms of your administration's in terms of your report's characterization of China, as well as what might happen in the United States and U.S. policy toward China, I know that this report, as you mentioned, was drafted before the election results were known. So, of course, it's very hard to predict what exactly would be the U.S. policy, and you probably had to incorporate elements that would be relevant for either a Trump administration or a potential Harris administration. So I think now that we're post-election, there probably will be some areas in which you'll have more clarity into where the U.S. direction is. So echoing what Ellen said, I think the United States, you mentioned in your report that the United States lacks a sense of end game with China. I think right now that we have a new Trump administration, I think you'll have more of a sense of the end game as shifting from managing competition with China to winning the competition with China. So it's a more clear sense of a desire for U.S. Leadership, U.S. victory, but also significant U.S. advantage vis-a-vis China. Your report also said that Washington and Beijing hope to avoid a Cold War. I wonder if that characterization would still be true for a next Trump administration, because we are already seeing a number of the folks that Trump has announced that he hopes to nominate they have used language to characterize the United States and China as already in a Cold War. You mentioned the desire for the United States to negotiate broader agreements to address multiple issues with China simultaneously, hence creating incentives for China to cooperate. I think it might be difficult for the next Trump administration to think about multiple things that they can cooperate with China on, or to think about these broad agreements with China, given the issues that they had and problems that they assess with efforts to cooperate and engage with China. The last thing I will mention on the assessments of the next administration's policies towards China is you mentioned the tendency that the difficult binary choice, if South Korea were to face a binary choice between choosing between the United States and China, that ROK would choose the United States because of your recognition of the importance of the United States for your security and prosperity, but that China remains an economic partner and ally on North Korea. I think the tensions that you're feeling now already on this will be further potentially magnified in the next administration, in which not only will you probably have to recognize that with intense U.S.-China competition, the United States may ask more of you on the security front, but there also may be more desire, even on the economic front, for our key allies and partners to decrease their exchanges or economic relations with China. Very quickly on your recommendations, I very much support most of your recommendations and commend you for thinking of creative ways or ways to particularly enhance the U.S. ROK alliance vis-a-vis China. Very much appreciate your recommendation for cooperation on shipbuilding. As you know, that's a major issue that we've identified, and the next Trump administration has also identified that the United States wants to invest more on. I also really commend your recommendation for ROK to do more on Indo-Pacific maritime security, including a ROK defense posture that is broader and will cover more regional threats beyond just North Korea. I would love to see the institutionalization of strategic consultations between ROK and Japan on a range of issues, including the Taiwan Strait. I also think that your recommendations on denuclearization is definitely in the right direction. But what I would mention is I don't think it would be reasonable to assume that the United States can have nuclear arms control talks with both China and Russia. Even in the Biden administration, we've seen very limited progress on arms control talks with China. And it's not clear that that would necessarily be a priority for President Trump. The three questions I'll leave you with is I very much appreciated your report's reference to the axis of upheaval, China, Russia, and North Korea, Iran. And there's quite a discussion between the China-North Korea relationship, which I thought was quite nuanced. But the question I have for you is, to what extent can South Korea play a role in either slowing the growing China-Russia relationship or drive a wedge between the two? With the recognition that even in the Indo-Pacific, we could see Russia supporting China in any type of contingency in the future. The second question I had for you is, given North Korea's support of Russia, as well as North Korean troops in Ukraine, what are your thoughts on growing NATO involvement in the Indo-Pacific? I didn't see that reference in the report, but I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that. And the last question I had is, your report touches quite a bit on Taiwan, what the ROK do with the United States, Japan, and to some extent the Philippines and Australia on Taiwan. But is there anything that you think South Korea could do directly with Taiwan, either at the official or unofficial level? Great, thank you.
Well, thank you, Bonnie, for those very helpful remarks and feedback and questions. Let me turn now to Steve, who will offer his perspective from London on the conclusions analysis in the report and add a little bit more, perhaps, European reactions to the issues raised in the report. So, Steve, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. I would certainly agree with Alan and Bonnie and yourself in paying compliments to the authors of the report. I think it is a very important and valuable and thought-provoking report. I would like to make three main points and then two supplementary ones. The first one is that, from my perspective, reading the report, it looks like it's a report telling us how Korea is standing up. And as a result of Korea standing up, it's time for Koreans to step up. I think from my perspective, that is absolutely very, very welcome. If anything, why do you take so long to come up with something like this? Korea should have been doing this quite some time ago. You have been building up that capabilities. You can be and should be playing a much more proactive role. And I don't see any reason why the United Kingdom or countries in Europe, the European Union, would not want to see Korea playing a much more proactive role in regional security, or perhaps even beyond regional security issues. So that's, I think, the simple, straightforward one. But that leads to the second point, which is that there is a report produced by you as an independent research institution. How much traction does your report have with the government in South Korea and with the people in your country? Is this something that will be embraced and supported by them? Or is it something which is very much the cutting edge thinkings of some of the most thoughtful scholars in South Korea? The two are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but it would be rather useful to have a better sense of that in terms of how we place that report. Because if it represents what the Korean government is prepared to do, it is a very big deal. But if it's a matter of there is something to be put to the Korean government that they should be taking this on, I would warmly applaud on the side and encourage you to do so and hope for the best. But this kind of leads to the third point I want to raise, and I there focus very much on your report about the Taiwan issue, because some of the other issues about China, Bonnie has already spoken eloquently about. I think you are talking about a much more proactive role for South Korea in the event of a Taiwan Strait crisis, which of course is extremely welcome, which is of course something that would be very much needed if we end up in a situation like that. Taiwan, the US, will need all the support they can get from allies. And South Korea is a particularly important one there, not only because of the geography, but also because of the capabilities you have and the industrial capacities you have in terms of the not just for the ship repairs and support that you have mentioned in your in the report, but also the simple matter of resupplying the stock of ammunition and equipment that will be lost in that process. But mostly you talk about with the US. What about losses that happens on Taiwan itself? Would you be prepared to support them? And how would you look at that? And how would you look at the reactions that you will get from Beijing? And that reactions are likely to be very, very strong, very, very severe, indeed punitive. And you are right next door to them. And if the mere deployment of the THAAD systems when you were under a threat from North Korea elicit the kind of response from China, you just imagine what kind of responses they are going to bring to bear on you if you were playing a direct supportive role in the US-Taiwan defense operations. And how much political will is there in the government and in the country at large for Korea to take on that role? I think that would be a really useful thing to have. This kind of leads me to the two little supplementary points. I'm trying to keep it within the 5 minutes we were allocated. And the fourth point I want to raise is that the report focused very much on the regional side of it, but not beyond, not really much beyond the regional side of it. Why not? I mean, if you are defending the liberal international order, as the report says that you are suggesting that the Korean government should step up to support the liberal international order, that liberal international order is not just in the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific region. It is everywhere. Right now, it is in Ukraine, where that line is being tested and needs to be held. What would be your recommendations for your government to take a much more proactive role in supporting the international order where it is being immediately tested? And the fifth and the last supplementary point I want to ask is, it's great to see what you say about focusing on what Korea can and should do over Taiwan in the event of crisis. But what are your thinkings about deterring and making sure such a crisis does not arise at all? I think the thing about the Taiwan kind of scenario is that if we ever get to that scenario, we are all in an incredibly bad situation. There can be no winners if we actually have a Taiwan Strait crisis. If the Chinese use force against Taiwan and trigger American intervention, whatever the outcomes, there really will be no winner in that situation. And the game must be about deterrence. And I would therefore want to ask you and encourage you to think about what role you think Korea should play in helping with that deterrence, and think more creatively than the conventional military deterrence, because you are a very important industrial power. You have a lot of capabilities there in terms of economic strength and capacity, which, if being added to the American side, can be much more effective in advising the Chinese government not to take risk in provoking a crisis over Taiwan. If it is clear to the Chinese that even Korea will stand firmly with the US alongside the Japanese. I think they practically calculated that the Japanese will be in it anyway because so many US forces will be operating out of Japanese bases. And they probably calculated the Australians will be on side. If they calculate you are on side too, the calculation becomes much, much bigger. Will you go down that route? Will you want to think about that? I better stop here. Thank you.
Steve, that's super helpful. All three of you offered really valuable remarks. I want to offer a couple comments as well, simply because this is a great opportunity that the report presents. And then we'll go back to the report co-authors and get your reactions to the comments that we've given. First, I just want to foot stop and highlight the value of this kind of report, and that you were willing to take on so many important, sensitive issues about China, about the relationship, about foreign policy questions that oftentimes go unquestioned. I think also your willingness to come up with proposals which may not necessarily be welcome or at the very top of the to-do list in either your government in Seoul or in the new Trump administration. I think it's really important that the US and its allies have these kind of very difficult discussions on sensitive issues. And you can't always wait for Washington to be the one to raise these questions. And so it's really good that allies are raising these questions. And I hope that we will see additional reports from others in South Korea, as well as from those in Japan and Australia, Southeast Asia, and Europe, to also raise these questions. These are momentous challenges that the world is now facing, and everyone has a different perspective. And the perspective from Seoul and other capitals looks a little bit different from Washington. And if the US is going to maintain these alliance relationships, it can't just force everyone else to go along. It also has to listen and adapt to others. And this report is offers that kind of signaling. Let me say a little bit about the analysis on China very, very briefly, because I think Bonnie and others already touched upon it. I would agree with her that in the 2000s, when China was going through its leadership transition from Hu Jintao, they did not expect Xi Jinping to accumulate so much power, and they certainly didn't expect him to stay beyond 2 terms. But I would say, alignment with sort of something that's implicit in the report, that having faced the global financial crisis and looking at color revolutions around the world, I do think there probably was a consensus in the Chinese leadership that China needed to not move in the direction of westernization and independent rule of law and free markets, but back towards its Leninist roots and strengthen the role of the party domestically, have a more assertive Chinese foreign policy. And that's what we're seeing, how the sort of power shakeup within China played out amongst the elite. I think that is a separate issue from a consensus that the party itself needed to reassert its dominance over how it managed the economy and the kind of foreign policy. So in some respects, the overall policy trajectory China is moving in is not radically different from some of the analysis that China's leaders probably had 15 or 20 years ago. But I wanted to ask and comment on economics in particular. So I think the report is very clear about what we in Washington call offensive policies, the need to adopt policies to create more resilient supply chains, strengthen our own technological and manufacturing capabilities, reduce overdependence on China. I think that's a strength. But there's also questions now, particularly given that the U.S. elections are over, about the way the U.S. is going to continue to marshal defensive policies with regard to China, and be curious about your views about those kinds of things. The first Trump administration leveled a series of tariffs against China in order to get a trade deal. The Biden administration kept those tariffs largely in place and added a few more. but they also expanded restrictions on technology, export controls, inbound investment, outbound investment. There's new rules being drafted related to data security. Those could, for example, with regard to the auto industry, essentially split the world into two different entirely, auto technology platforms and markets, one centered around China and the one centered around non-Chinese participants. So I'm curious, in the Biden administration talked about small yard, high fence. We may be getting towards high yard, high fence. What is your view about those defensive approaches? The report does say that South Korea has had an extensive economic relationship with China. It has shifted somewhat, reduced somewhat of its level of trade with China and increased trade and investment with the United States. But are you looking in the way the Trump administration looks to potentially outright decouple with China? How would that sit from your perspective? Are you still looking to maintain some types of economic ties with China, given how close they are with you and how large a part of South Korea's economic development it has been so far? So let me stop there. We've given you a lot. You gave us a lot to think about in the report. We've tried to match that in giving you things to think about with our feedback. So why don't we go back to you, Chae-Sung and Inju, for your thoughts, respond to some of the things we've said, and then we'll take it from there. So back to you all.
All right. Thank you so much. The wonderful, very thoughtful comments and suggestions. There's so many points. I'm not sure I can cover all of them, but just pick several things that just came to my mind. First of all, the response from Korean government, we don't know yet. We just released paper a few days ago. But what is encouraging news is both the progressive liberal party wings, news media, and conservative media, they all cover and our reports. They are very interested in our suggestion. And as you mentioned, says maybe our reports might offer good food for thought on Korean public. I guess we have stimulated some discussions going on there. Another thing is Trump factors. We have thought hard about Trump factors. Yes, right. Unpredictability is back. He think one thing one day and change his mind next day. We won't know what he wants day to day, which is potentially a bit dangerous. But what is nice about his second term, hopefully, is known unpredictability is better than unknown unpredictabilities, I would say. He might make bad decision on the fly, but we can try to let him change his mind, avoiding worse consequences. It would make it easier if U.S. allies, Japan, Korea, Australia, UK can work together, provide coordinated a larger incentive framework to the new administration in Washington. So we hope we can do it together. And on your question about economic retaliation, Beijing, harsh response, Beijing, yes, we thought about that issue as well. I think it's not wise for South Korea to take on China head-to-head, one-to-one. Instead, we prefer deal with China in the multilateral settings. We have to develop some mini-lateral multilateral to address China's response. So we provide some policy suggestions in our report. Please read it. And also we noticed that many Korean companies, large-scale companies, already decide to gradually exhibit from Chinese market for a lot of reasons, many reasons. They're smart enough to take action earlier. But still, we still depend on Chinese technology in some areas. So we want to take a time to gradually make change. But one thing I want to still emphasize is when China is becoming increasingly assertive, we need to look into source of China anxiety and vulnerability. If China is increasingly isolated from Western markets and supply chains, China will have less at stake in potential conflict with West, and therefore less incentive to avoid escalation. So as long as China remains linked to the United States and Korea and other major economic powers through the exchange of goods that are difficult to replace, the West will be more successful in deterring China from engaging in destabilizing actions. On the Scott's question about defense technology, trends or China's allocate China's issue, we anticipate, if China can provide state-of-the-art technology to Korean counterpart, perhaps Korean side would be happy to work with Chinese counterpart. But in the past, China never did that. That's what I heard from our scientists and technologists. So in our Koreans, the scientific community, they don't have a big hope, the long-term, collaboration with Chinese counterpart. So they are well prepared for they found is the US allies. They're in terms of science technology collaboration, the most important players in the United States and its allies. Okay, perhaps Professor Zhang will be in a better position to discuss more security-related issues you raised.
Thank you. Very helpful. To begin with, the main audience of this report was American government rather than South Korean government. That was a very ambitious plan. I'm not sure if American government is interested in South Korean academics' suggestion, but we want to ask to some extent and to suggest how South Koreans are thinking about US-China rivalry. As you said, the ultimate state, the end game of this competition should be hopefully peaceful. So we try to deliver the views from the allies, how we see this rivalry. And we didn't, as Inju said, didn't expect Trump administration. Now it's totally changed the landscape of security, economic security. So we have to think about, but we wrote from the perspective of some universal view of how to maintain and preserve or develop liberal international order. And the original report was much longer. There are a lot more about different issues, but we try to select most important and then most sensitive issues. I think that's why you asked so important and many interesting questions. To some extent, I think it was successful, but we have to think about several issues. So let me deal with one by one very shortly. Ellen knows South Korea very well. She is really an expert. So we try to write this effort from the perspective of maybe Korea first. I think that's natural. Every country wants to propose his own national interest first. The real question is, what is the second? If Trump administration proposes America first, America second, America third, then I think it will meet a lot of challenges. At least from our perspective, Korea first maybe, but alliance the second, US third maybe. So we try to find out some common areas of interest and how to enhance alliance in this very difficult situations of great power rivalry, the return of geopolitics, and so on. Second, Trump administration's focus will be China. That's inevitable. However, now we don't know what Trump administration's China policy will be. We know that it's based on economic nationalism. They want to revive American economy. But what about in terms of security? What kind of security policies, comprehensive regional policies, Trump administration has vis-a-vis China? We don't know yet. I think it is in the making. We are selecting, the high-ranking officials to deal with security issues with China, but we'll see. I will not say President Trump is not really a specialist about military affairs, but he says that peace can be achieved by transactional approach rather than most formidable systemic deterrence based on the cooperation with allies, even though there might be some questions about, equal burden sharing. So we'll see. as we see in the long run, then I think we can adjust. So after the report is published, we are, confronted with new issues. Third, how about nuclear deterrence in the future when Trump administration will not continue the policies from Biden administration? That will be a big challenge. But I still think, at least from the perspective of report, we have to stick to the extended deterrence. That's very important. If there is more questions from the next U.S. administrations about, from different areas, such as dealing with North Korea in a different perspective, giving up the purpose of complete denuclearization, that will pose serious challenges. But I at least think that there might be some minimum consensus between U.S. policy circles and South Korean government that extended deterrence that we developed after Washington consensus is still holds true. We have to stick to that. And then, collective resilience, that's an important one. But it should not be ad hoc policy. It should be based on a permanent, some kind of institutionalization of norms, which is still weak among the allies. So I think we have to work on that. But it's, I think, very good comments. We have to think about that more. About Bonnie's questions, between China and Russia, we might drive a wedge. I think the policies of these two countries are very different. Russia is breaking all the laws of liberal international order, especially national sovereignty. However, China is different. China still sticks to the norms of national security, the national sovereignty, and they try to preserve the basic norms of United Nations. And I still think that China permitting the status of de jure status of North Korea's nuclear state is still problematic to China. And we can use the issue of North Korean nuclear development as a wedge issue between China and Russia. So we have to emphasize the differences between China and Russia. China wants to be the alternative hegemony in the future. So they want to preserve as much as possible that the nations try to preserve so far. And NATO, now is a very important question. If United States does not, the next administration, respect a multilateral norms, then like-minded countries like South Korea, Japan, Australia, and European countries should preserve liberal international order multilaterally. We have built many unilateral and multilateral institutions so far under Biden administration, like, Quad and AUKUS and trilateral with Japan. But if next administration only approaches the security issues from bilateral and more transactional approach, I think there are more to cooperate on between European countries and South Korea. So now we have some platform, the basis. Most difficult question is Taiwan. I don't know. If China has some kind of prearrangement with North Korea, if China wants to do something provocative or revisionist vis-a-vis Taiwan, then I think there are a lot of things that South Korea should do into front war. But the real question is, how critical is Taiwan to South Korea's national interests? We have to think about it. But what this report suggests is that there was no real government-to-government mechanism to consultation in dealing with this issue, because South Korea does not take this issue as an alliance issue so far. It is a very difficult issue. So probably from track 2 or from a very highest level of consultation between two countries, now is the time to talk about that. It doesn't mean that we have to provoke China. There are other means, such as a multilateral approach to preserve the status quo, not just military deterrence, but also some economic and diplomatic measures to deliver the message that South Korea still think that the status quo of cross-strait is very important. We think that the line of communication is critical to South Korea's interests, all those things. But the report suggests that we have to start to think about it and talk about it. Last thing, Scott, very interesting question, very important. Many people think that Trump administration's day one, there will be 60% of tariff against China, which will disrupt not just bilateral issues, but also economic issues inside East Asia. But we have to see if there will be, as you said, outright decoupling of economies between two countries. That will be also a big burden to American consumers. There will be inflations. So in some sense, I think this is a means for bilateral rivalry, but also it's an approach, a little populist, to say to the American people that President Trump is doing his best. That's okay. But is the package of this economic nationalism sustainable is a different one. So we have to be very prudent if South Korea can follow this line of approach for the time being. But as an ally, I think if this is a part of a broader U.S.-China strategy, then I think we have to talk to the American government and try to cooperate. And we did some in the past. South Korea was #1 invest country to the U.S. last year. So I think there is a lot of not just diversification, but also concentration of South Korea's capital to the United States. So that will continue, I guess. There's a big direction. So we'll think about it.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for your reactions to everything we threw at you in the past hour. I need to wrap up in just a second, but I wanted to see if Ellen, Steve, or Bonnie wanted to offer an initial brief response to the comments that you just heard. Feel free to, any three of you, to chime in. Steve?
We're very happy to chime in very quickly. I think the report clearly, as the authors have mentioned, written before the Trump victory. We have this conversation now in the discussions about the Trump administration. But what we haven't taken into account more, or from my perspective, enough of the new Trump administration is the effect it will have on U.S. relationship with its democratic allies. And also the effect it will have on the American standing in the liberal international order. China should actually be less unhappy that there is going to be a second Trump administration than have a Harris administration with a Democratic Party controlling the House and the Senate. Because that will be a scenario where the US will have much stronger capacity to engage with American allies and support the liberal international order. A Trump administration is going to go in the opposite direction. If we thought that in the global South, there are already many countries that think about American hypocrisy over Gaza or Israeli actions in Gaza, just think about how much stronger the Trump administration will be supporting the Netanyahu administration in Israel than the Biden administration has done, and how much more damage it will do to American global standing. So the report, I think, is written more on the basis that we have an America that plays a more constructive, positive role. In the next 4 years, we may have a U.S. administration that plays a slightly different role. The second point I want to raise very briefly, echoing back to the point about Taiwan, is the reality that I think if we look at a Taiwan scenario, China on its own would not have put Korea into the main equation of calculations, and they would have wanted to have a Taiwan crisis that immediately involved a Korean Peninsula crisis. But if they see South Korea playing a very positive role over Taiwan in supporting the Americans and the Taiwanese, then the temptation for them to actually bring the North Koreans into the picture would be so much greater. And there is a need to balance between the two to see which actually is a better outcome for the world overall. I'll stop here.
Okay. I don't know if Ellen or Bonnie, you want to jump in with a point or two. Go ahead, Ellen. Sure.
Yeah, I'll be just quick. I'll just add that we need to remember that Trump administration, maybe it might, for the Union administration, I think it might be good for to stress and distinguish South Korea policy from 2017, 2018 vis-a-vis now. I think that in Trump's memory, South Korea at the time had a strategic ambiguity in its policy between China and the U.S. But South Korea now have very clearly aligned with the United States on many of the things, and it has a Indo-Pacific strategy. So I think that the most significant thing for Yoon administration going forward is how to present South Korea and stress Korea is a reliable, responsible ally of the United States. And I think that the South Korea already spends more than 2.5% of GDP on defense spending. And there's many South Korean companies have a huge investment in the U.S. I think those numbers actually does show how much South Korea is doing. And I think that presenting that at the beginning is really important for South Korea going forward.
欢迎来到六度解析新闻背后的多维思考，带你洞悉头条背后的世界。在今日华尔街频道的六度解析中，我们将深入探究时事热点，为你揭开新闻背后的真相。在这个信息泛滥、真相难觅的时代，六度解析应运而生。我运用海量数据、人工智能整合以及专家观点，层层剥析每个故事。通过实时背景数据挖掘，确保你获得全面的新闻资讯。然而，我们关注的不仅仅是数据，更重要的是将它们串联起来。我将分析多方视角，揭示隐藏的脉络，为你提供单一媒体常常忽略的背景信息。无论是政治、经济，还是全球事务，我都将为你带来最具洞察力的分析。试想一下，拥有洞悉全局的能力，做出明智的决策，参与有意义的讨论，这就是六度解析带给你的价值。它不仅仅是新闻分析，更是一种赋能的工具。加入今日华尔街的六度解析，共同探索头条背后的故事。你通往深度理解的旅程，从这里开始。不要只是阅读新闻，要解码新闻，理解新闻，活出新闻。这一切尽在六度解析。立即订阅，不错过任何真知灼见。因为了解真相仅仅是个开始。